Ardennes Forest, December 19th, 1944. The morning air is frozen, gray, and silent. Until it isn't. A German Panther emerges from the mist, black cross painted over frost, its engine growling like a trapped animal. The gunner spots movement at 900 yards, a low, fast silhouette cutting through the snow. American tank destroyer, 3 o'clock. The Panther halts. Its massive 75mm cannon swings toward the shape. The gunner breathes steady, aiming, waiting for range data. But the shape moves again. Faster this time. It's not advancing. It's circling. Through his periscope, the commander blinks. The enemy machine is impossibly quick, darting from cover to cover, throwing up white plumes of snow. The German loader shouts, "It's a light tank!" "No," the commander mutters. "It's too fast." The Panther fires. A thunderclap that shakes the forest. The shell slams into a ridge and explodes, a second too late. The American vehicle is already gone. A second later, a flash erupts from the tree line on their flank. A streak of fire cuts across the fog. The Panther's turret rings with the impact, 76mm armor piercing, punching through its thinner side plate. Inside, chaos. The driver screams. Flames blossom. The last thing the gunner sees through the smoke is a streak of motion, that same blur of green, vanishing at a speed that doesn't belong to any tank. 55 miles per hour. That was the M18 Hellcat. The Germans had a name for it after that morning. Der Blitzgeist, the lightning ghost. To them, it wasn't a vehicle. It was an insult to physics. A machine that appeared, killed, and disappeared before a crew could even reload. In most tank duels of World War II, power decided the victor. The heaviest gun, the thickest armor, the longest range. The Tiger and Panther were kings of that world, steel gods of the battlefield. But the M18 Hellcat played by different rules. It wasn't built to endure. It was built to vanish. When a German crew spotted one, they had about 3 minutes to act. 3 minutes before the Hellcat was gone, repositioned, or worse, already behind them. That was the paradox of the late war. The slow, invincible beasts of 1943 now hunted by machines that were faster, lighter, and infinitely more flexible. The M18 wasn't supposed to work. Thin armor, open turret, a lightweight engine better suited for an airplane. But on the field, its speed turned those flaws into weapons. At 55 miles per hour, it could relocate 6 times faster than a Panther could turn its turret. It could cross a kill zone before a Tiger could even reload. It was a product of American industry stripped of romance, an engineer's answer to the myth of invincibility. The Germans had built monuments. The Americans had built velocity. And when those two philosophies met in the fields of Europe, the results rewrote the math of armored warfare. In the war's final winter, the M18 Hellcat didn't win by being stronger. It won by being faster than fear. This is the story of how a cheap, open-topped tank destroyer humiliated Germany's best armor, broke the myth of the Tiger, and proved that sometimes survival isn't about armor thickness. It's about how quickly you can disappear. 3 minutes. That was all a German crew had. And after that, the Hellcat was gone, already hunting someone else. In every German after-action report of 1944, one phrase repeats like an accusation. The American tank destroyers are reckless. It wasn't meant as praise. It was disbelief. To the Wehrmacht, a tank was supposed to be a fortress, a machine that carried its protection with it. The Tiger I weighed 57 tons, carried 120 millimeters of frontal armor, and looked unstoppable from every angle. Inside its steel walls, crews felt invincible. Then they met the M18 Hellcat, a 17-ton tin can with paper-thin armor that could be punctured by machine gun fire. It didn't even have a roof. Its turret was open to the sky. Its sides were barely thicker than a refrigerator door. On paper, it shouldn't have survived a single battle, but paper doesn't measure movement. To the American Army, the M18 wasn't a tank. It was a tank destroyer. And that distinction changed everything. The U.S. Tank Destroyer Command, founded in 1941, believed that mobility could replace armor. Their doctrine was clear: seek, strike, and move. They didn't want slow brawlers. They wanted hunters. The Hellcat's thin armor wasn't a flaw. It was an intentional trade-off. Every inch of steel removed from its hull meant more speed, more acceleration, more room for the only thing that mattered: a 76-millimeter gun and a crew fast enough to use it before the enemy realized they were there. German crews called it suicidal. American crews called it calculated. Because in the Hellcat, you didn't wait for the enemy to find you. You found them first, and then you disappeared. The design logic was simple but brutal. Armor slows you down. Slower tanks die slower, but they still die. A fast tank that never gets hit lives forever. It was war reduced to physics. That's why Hellcat crews trained differently. They didn't learn how to trade blows. They learned how to vanish. They used map reading, radio coordination, and timing like sniper teams. They memorized distances, how long it took to crest a hill, how long to reverse, how long before a German gun could rotate. The average German Panther took nearly 19 seconds to traverse its turret 360 degrees. The Hellcat could reposition its entire vehicle 200 yards in the same time. That was the duel. 19 seconds of geometry versus 19 seconds of velocity. The Germans built tanks to dominate ground. The Americans built machines to escape it. But to the casual observer, even to some Allied officers, the Hellcat looked absurd. Open turret, lightweight armor, no stabilizer, no heavy gun shield. One well-placed artillery shell could destroy it instantly. That fragility earned it nicknames like Cardboard Killer and the Suicide Sled. Even within the U.S. Army, some called it a race car pretending to be a tank. And yet, on the battlefield, results silenced critics. In combat tests, Hellcats engaged and destroyed German armor at ranges where Shermans died. At the Battle of Arracourt, they achieved a kill ratio of 10.1 against Panthers and Panzer IVs. In one engagement, an M18 crew destroyed 4 Panthers before the Germans even located them. The key wasn't firepower, it was tempo. German doctrine depended on predictable opponents, tanks that advanced, stopped, and fired. The Hellcat refused to play that game. It moved like cavalry, not armor. One after-action report from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion described the tactic perfectly. When the enemy turned their turrets, we were already gone. When they turned again, we were shooting. Speed didn't just protect the crew, it confused the enemy. German gunners trained to fire on stationary silhouettes. But the Hellcat never stayed still. At 55 miles per hour, it blurred the lines between reconnaissance and assault. Crews even joked that if they got hit, it was their own fault for stopping. But beneath the humor was real danger. The open turret left crews vulnerable to snipers, grenades, even shrapnel. Rain soaked their radios, snow froze their ammunition. And yet, they preferred that to the alternative: being trapped in a slow-moving coffin. The M18's design told a different kind of story. One about a war that was shifting away from armor thickness toward information and mobility. Every Hellcat carried 2 radios, one for battalion command, one for artillery coordination. That meant every crew could act like its own strike team, calling fire or coordinating flanking maneuvers in seconds. German Panthers had no such network. Their crews were powerful, but deaf. Their radios often jammed, their coordination fractured. The Hellcat wasn't a better tank, it was a better system. To the Germans, that was infuriating. They had spent years perfecting the art of armored warfare, the myth of blitzkrieg, the ideal of decisive power. And now, in the war's final year, they were being outmaneuvered by machines that looked like toys. But war had changed. The industrial battlefield rewarded speed, not spectacle. The M18 Hellcat wasn't there to duel the Tiger. It was there to end the duel entirely. Because if you could move faster than fear, you didn't need armor. You only needed timing. And the nerve to drive straight at the myth and make it miss. The Hellcat was not born in a design lab. It was born out of panic. In 1942, the U.S. Army faced a terrifying truth. Its Sherman tanks were already obsolete. Reports from North Africa were brutal. German Panzer IVs and newly arrived Tigers were ripping through Allied formations at long range, their high-velocity guns turning American armor into scrapyard fireballs. The Army needed something fast, something that could kill tanks without becoming one. And so, in early 1943, the Tank Destroyer Command gave a desperate order to the Buick Motor Division of General Motors. Build a vehicle faster than anything on the battlefield. Arm it with a 76mm gun. Make it ready in 18 months. Buick's engineers stared at that order like it was a joke. But the Army wasn't joking. The challenge was simple on paper, impossible in reality. How do you make a 76mm gun platform that weighs less than half of a Sherman and still moves like a sports car? The answer lay not in armor, but in automobile thinking. Buick engineer Harley Earl, best known for sleek pre-war car designs, brought in concepts straight from Detroit: torsion bar suspension, lightweight cast hull sections, and even aircraft-inspired construction techniques. The team treated the Hellcat not like a tank, but like a hot rod with a cannon. They stripped weight everywhere. Steel armor went from 50mm to 25mm. The hull was welded instead of riveted. The turret was open-topped to save hundreds of pounds. The result was a combat vehicle that weighed just 17.7 tons, light enough to be airlifted by cargo plane, and fast enough to break every assumption the Army had about armor. At the heart of the Hellcat was a Continental R975 C4 radial engine, the same power plant used in aircraft like the T-6 Texan trainer. It produced 400 horsepower, giving the Hellcat an astounding 22.6 horsepower per ton, nearly double that of the Sherman and almost twice that of the German Tiger Scheiß. With that power-to-weight ratio, the M18 could hit 55 mph on roads and maintain 25-30 mph across country. For comparison, the Tiger, the pride of Germany's Panzer Corps, barely reached 24 mph at full throttle. The Hellcat was not built to absorb punishment. It was built to outrun it. Inside the vehicle, the design screamed minimalism. The driver sat low, peering through a narrow slit protected only by bulletproof glass. The gunner and commander operated in an open turret with no roof, surrounded by exposed ammunition. The armor around them ranged from 12mm on the sides to 25mm on the front. A German machine gun could punch through it at 300 yards. And yet, crews didn't complain. They knew what they were driving. Not a tank, but a predator. The M18 wasn't supposed to stand and fight. Its entire doctrine revolved around motion. The USPO, the tank destroyer school at Camp Hood, drilled crews on what they called shoot and scoot doctrine. Engage the enemy from ambush. Fire, relocate, fire again. Never stay longer than 90 seconds in one position. That 90-second rule wasn't just tactical, while it was mathematical. German artillery response time was roughly 3 minutes. If a Hellcat moved every 90 seconds, it could never be bracketed by return fire. In essence, the M18 turned survival into a stopwatch game. German crews didn't understand this at first. They assumed the light American destroyers would stand and trade shots. But when the first Panthers faced the Hellcat in France, they realized the truth. The enemy was faster than their own targeting system. The M18's hydraulic turret traverse, at 24 degrees per second, was faster than any German tank of the war. The Tiger's traverse rate? Barely 6 degrees per second. That meant in a close-range fight, the Hellcat could literally circle its opponent faster than the enemy could turn its gun. One German after-action report called it eine Katze ohne Panzerung, aber mit Zähnen, a cat without armor, but with fangs. The Hellcat's 76mm M1A2 gun wasn't the most powerful weapon of the war. It couldn't penetrate a Tiger's front at 1,000 meters. But it could kill Panzer IVs and Panthers from the side. And more importantly, it could choose when to fire. Speed gave the crew control of the engagement, and control in 1944 meant survival. When the first M18s rolled off the assembly line, even General Eisenhower doubted their usefulness. He preferred heavier armor, thicker plates, real tanks. But by the time they reached the front lines in France, the doctrine had evolved. Tank destroyer battalions worked with reconnaissance units, artillery spotters, and infantry scouts. They used radio intelligence to intercept German armor movements and pre-position Hellcats on flanks, a kind of armored guerrilla warfare that the slow, methodical Wehrmacht couldn't adapt to. By the summer of 1944, the M18 had become the fastest production armored vehicle in the world. It could hit 50 mph on European roads that stopped Tigers cold. When German soldiers first saw one, they didn't laugh. They stared. It didn't look like a tank. It looked like something from another war. One Wehrmacht officer later wrote in his diary, "They have a machine that moves faster than fear." That was the secret. The Hellcat wasn't an American answer to German armor. It was an American philosophy of war. Decentralized, mobile, industrial, efficient. Germany had built symbols. America built systems. The Hellcat was the system's cutting edge, a machine that didn't need to survive hits because it refused to stay still long enough to take one. It was the embodiment of a new logic of war, that in the age of engines, motion itself was the strongest armor of all. War isn't about who shoots first. It's about who calculates faster. And by 1944, the math of tank warfare had changed. Let's break it down. The German Tiger was 57 tons, 100 mm 20 meters of armor, an 88mm KWK-36 cannon, top speed 24 mph. The Panther, 45 tons, 80mm frontal armor, 75mm high-velocity gun, top speed 29 mph. The M18 Hellcat, 17.7 tons, 25mm armor, 76mm M1A2 gun, top speed 55 mph. At first glance, it's absurd. The Tiger outweighed the Hellcat by 40 tons, literally 3 times its mass. It could absorb punishment that would vaporize lighter vehicles. The German guns outranged and outpenetrated almost everything the Allies had. But paper armor didn't tell the whole story. The mathematics of destruction, weight, speed, traverse, communication, decided who lived long enough to shoot again. So the U.S. Army tested the numbers. A Tiger took 19 seconds to rotate its turret 360 degrees. A Panther, 15 seconds. The Hellcat's hydraulic traverse, 6 seconds. In a duel, that meant the Hellcat could circle an opponent 3 times before the German gun could catch up. Then came acceleration. The Tiger needed 25 seconds to hit 20 mph. The Hellcat did it in 6. That meant a Hellcat could appear, fire, and vanish before a German crew had even finished calling out a firing solution. Field telemetry recorded Hellcats averaging 28 mph across country compared to the Tiger's 12. The Panther could pivot faster, but its weight meant it tore up soft ground, often bogging down in mud or snow. Speed wasn't glamour. It was survival math. Because every second spent stationary increased the probability of death. In 1944, the average German tank kill on the Western Front took 3 minutes and 18 seconds from target detection to firing impact. That included turret traverse, range finding, and elevation adjustment. The M18 needed less than 45 seconds to find a target, fire, and move to a new position. That's why German commanders called it unfair. They weren't fighting tanks, they were fighting time. Let's look at energy. The kinetic energy of an 88mm shell from a Tiger at 1,000 meters was about 2.9 megajoules, a devastating punch. The 76mm round from a Hellcat carried only 1.8 megajoules. On paper, that's a losing exchange. But when you factor position and frequency of fire, the balance tilts. A Tiger averaged 6 to 8 aimed rounds per minute in combat conditions. The Hellcat? Up to 12. Over a 3-minute engagement, a Tiger might fire 20 shells. A Hellcat? 36. More importantly, the Hellcat was already moving after each burst. If the Tiger missed the first shot, odds were it would never get a second. Even more brutal was the power-to-weight ratio. Tiger White's 12 HP ton. Panther, 15 HP ton. M18 Hellcat, 22.6 HP ton. It wasn't just faster. It was alive in motion. Crews described it as riding a thunderclap. One driver said, "If you sneezed on the throttle, she'd jump 20 yards." That mobility gave Hellcats a new kind of immunity. Statistical invisibility. U.S. after-action analysis showed that in engagements where Hellcats maintained movement above 20 mph, hit probability by German guns dropped below 8%. For stationary tanks, it was 63%. That's not luck, that's physics. But speed had another effect. Communication. Tank destroyer battalions were wired for coordination. Each M18 carried 2 radios, one short-range intercom, one long-range SCR 508. Crews could coordinate flanking maneuvers in real time. German tanks couldn't. The Wehrmacht's command net was centralized, powerful but slow. Radio silence orders, encryption delays, and rigid hierarchy turned every battle into a bureaucracy. When a Panther spotted a Hellcat, it often had to report up the chain before acting. By the time permission came, the Hellcat was gone. Numbers and illusions. The Tiger's armor could stop shells, but it couldn't stop time. The Panther's optics could identify targets, but not react fast enough to changing ones. Meanwhile, American units learned to fight like a swarm. A single Hellcat might seem weak, but 3 working together could encircle an enemy, striking from multiple angles faster than German gunners could adjust. The result? The Hellcat's kill-to-loss ratio averaged 2.4 to 1 in 1944 to 45, the highest of any U.S. tank destroyer. It was a machine optimized not for domination, but for decision speed. In the physics of war, that was a revolution. Because armor is finite, speed is not. Every pound of steel Germany poured into its tanks slowed them down. Every ounce America stripped away made the Hellcat deadlier. The Germans built monuments to power. The Americans built a stopwatch. And on the battlefields of France and Belgium, that stopwatch ran out for the Panthers first. In the war's math, protection wasn't the key to survival. Time was. And the Hellcat, the so-called tin can, was time made of steel. September 19th, 1944. Lorraine, France. The fields around the small town of Arracourt were soaked with fog, dew, and gasoline. On paper, this battlefield should have been the graveyard of American armor. In reality, it became the M18 Hellcat's masterpiece. The U.S. 4th Armored Division had stretched its lines thin, too thin, when the German 5th Panzer Army launched a counterattack. More than 260 Panthers and Panzer IVs advanced under cover of mist, supported by artillery and Luftwaffe reconnaissance. Facing them were Sherman tanks, a handful of infantry, and a small detachment of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats. No air support, no artillery advantage, just fast machines and nervous men. At 0700, the German armor appeared out of the fog, black silhouettes moving like giants through the fields. The Americans could hear their engines long before they saw them. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, commanding one of the 704th's Hellcats, recalled it years later. "We could feel the earth vibrate. You don't fight that kind of power head-on. You make it chase you." His crews positioned along a ridge near Lazy, hiding behind haystacks and farm walls. The visibility was under 100 yards, perfect for ambush. When the first Panther emerged, its crew didn't even realize they were being hunted. Leiper's gunner waited until the muzzle brake of the Panther's 75mm gun cleared the mist, then fired. The 76mm shell slammed into the Panther's side plate. The German tank shuddered, caught fire, and stopped. "Hit confirmed," the loader yelled. "Move!" The Hellcat reversed down the slope at full throttle, relocating before the next Panther could respond. In less than 20 seconds, it was gone. That pattern repeated across the front. Every time the Germans engaged one position, the Hellcats were already somewhere else, firing from a new angle. The fog became their camouflage. Over the course of that morning, Hellcats from the 704th and 603rd Battalions destroyed 28 German tanks for the loss of just 4 of their own. The Panthers never adapted. Their optics were superb at long range, but useless in fog. Their turret traverse was too slow for sudden flank attacks. And their commanders, bound by radio procedure, couldn't respond to a threat that moved faster than their communication network. By midday, the fog lifted. The battlefield was a graveyard. German armor burning in the fields, their commanders shouting in disbelief. The Americans advanced cautiously, Hellcats leading, engines humming at low idle. Their gunners moved like clockwork. Range, aim, fire, move. No one stayed still. By September 20th, the Germans had lost 86 tanks and assault guns in the Arracourt sector. The Americans lost 9. The ratio defied logic. But the math didn't lie. Each M18 averaged 6 kill engagements during the battle, all based on movement and coordination. They weren't dueling. They were managing time. Every 704th Hellcat operated in pairs or trios. One drew fire. The others flanked. They used roads, hedgerows, and even ditches as launch paths. The radio chatter from that battle survives in fragments. You can hear the rhythm of the doctrine. 2-4, fire and scoot. 3-1, reposition west. Don't stop, they're turning. To an outsider, it sounded chaotic. To those men, it was a symphony of survival. German reports after Arracourt read like confessions. The enemy armored vehicles moved too quickly to engage. Their tactics resembled cavalry. Cavalry. That's exactly what the Hellcat was. Not a tank destroyer, not a tank. A modern descendant of the 19th century charge, but mechanized, electrified, and weaponized with radio coordination. In the words of Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding the 4th Armored Division, the M18 didn't win because it was tougher. It won because it was faster. The Hellcat was war on a stopwatch. One German officer who survived the battle was captured the next day. When interrogated, he said, "We thought they were Shermans at first, but they vanished too quickly. We never saw them twice in the same place." That statement became unofficial proof of doctrine success. Arracourt wasn't just a battle, it was a laboratory. The U.S. Army had just proven that a lighter, cheaper, faster vehicle could dismantle elite German armor through coordination alone. The statistics stunned even the Pentagon. The Hellcat had achieved the highest kill ratio of any armored vehicle in the European theater. After the battle, General Patton, never one to praise lightly, visited the 704th. He looked at the small, battered M18s parked in the mud and said simply, "Gentlemen, you've made me believe in speed." That was the moment the Hellcat transcended its nickname. No longer a tin can, it became the formula. The doctrine of mobility over mass had been proven in blood and fog. Arracourt taught the world a new rule. In modern war, the faster thinker wins, and sometimes the thinker drives 55 miles an hour. By late 1944, the German High Command was staring at numbers that didn't make sense. Their tanks were technically superior, better guns, better optics, thicker armor, yet their losses were accelerating. Arracourt wasn't an anomaly, it was a symptom. The Wehrmacht's logistics reports from September through December 1944 showed something terrifying. Over 40% of all tank losses on the Western Front occurred without confirmed hits in return. In plain terms, they were being ambushed, flanked, and outmaneuvered before they could fire. The Tiger and Panther were designed to dominate at range. Their 75mm and 88mm cannons could destroy anything within 2 kilometers. But that range meant nothing when your enemy never stayed still long enough to aim at. German doctrine was built on control through power. American doctrine had evolved into control through speed. That shift broke the German model from the inside out. Here's how the math fell apart. A typical German tank crew, 4 men, needed 90 seconds to identify, range, and aim at a moving target. In that same 90 seconds, an M18 Hellcat could cover 1.4 miles. That meant a Hellcat could change position twice before the German crew finished aiming at where it used to be. Every delay compounded. Each misfire cost 15 to 20 seconds. Every turn of the turret drained fuel and time. Every hesitation meant another tank dying somewhere else. When the Wehrmacht's after-action analysts plotted this data, the curve was unmistakable. Mobility trumped armor at a ratio of 3-1, once battlefield communication and fog were factored in. The Germans didn't lose the armor war because their tanks were bad. They lost because their doctrine couldn't process the speed of engagement. Their command structure, top-down, slow, linear, was incompatible with an enemy that fought like a swarm. The U.S. tank destroyer units were semi-autonomous. Platoon leaders didn't wait for divisional orders. They reacted in seconds, coordinating over radio. A German battalion might take 10 minutes to redeploy. A Hellcat company could relocate and re-engage in 3. That gap was fatal. One German officer from the 113th Panzer Brigade described it bitterly in his debrief. They fight like ghosts. You see one, fire, and suddenly it's gone. Then your comrade explodes from behind you. That sense of disorientation spread through the ranks. Even elite German crews began hesitating, not out of fear, but confusion. In warfare, hesitation is death. The numbers don't lie. Between September and December 1944, U.S. tank destroyer battalions reported an average kill-to-loss ratio of 2.41. German panzer units on the Western Front dropped below parity for the first time in the war. Hellcat battalions averaged 8 minutes per engagement, compared to 19 for German armor. Speed wasn't just protecting the Hellcat. It was breaking the enemy's decision cycle. The German OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, had been shattered. The Hellcat moved too fast for the orient stage. The enemy was always reacting to a situation that no longer existed. This wasn't just new warfare. It was industrial warfare accelerated. Each M18 was a node in a moving network. Each German tank was an isolated fortress. And fortresses, no matter how thick their walls, eventually fall to something faster and more flexible. The collapse wasn't just tactical. It was economic. Germany could barely produce 20 Tigers a month by late 1944. The U.S. could build 500 Hellcats in the same time. Every loss for Germany was irreplaceable. Every loss for America was an equation already solved. Build another, train another, deploy another. The numbers widened the gap. By the winter of 1944 to 45, German armor readiness fell to 43%. Allied armor readiness remained above 82%. U.S. tank destroyer battalions were operating at full strength, rotating crews faster than the Germans could rotate divisions. Even when the Hellcat wasn't killing tanks, it was killing momentum. German commanders had to slow their advances, fearing flanking fire. Panther crews spent more time scanning their sides than aiming forward. And once that paranoia set in, speed became fear. That's the math of collapse. Not a single explosion, but thousands of seconds lost in reaction time. The Wehrmacht's mythology, the unstoppable panzers, the perfect blitzkrieg, was being undone by arithmetic. The Allies didn't outgun them. They out-timed them. Every German tank destroyed at Arracourt, Bastogne, or the Saar wasn't just a loss of steel. It was a loss of seconds. Seconds that Germany could never get back. By early 1945, the Tiger and Panther were engineering marvels trapped in a strategic museum. Their armor was irrelevant, their guns overkill, their engines fragile. The war had become a contest not of strength, but response speed. And in that race, the Hellcat had no equal. Its crews didn't think in kilometers, they thought in minutes. 3 minutes to strike, 90 seconds to move, 55 miles an hour to live. The M18 wasn't an armored vehicle. It was a metronome of modern war. And when the final reports came in, they told the same story. Germany's best tanks had been defeated not by heavier guns, but by faster math. December 20th, 1944. The Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. The forest is white, frozen, and silent. The kind of silence that comes before violence. German armor columns move west through the fog. Panzers advancing in a long black line. The Wehrmacht believes the Americans are broken, retreating. They are wrong. Near Bastogne, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion is moving in reverse, not retreating but resetting the trap. They have Hellcats, and Hellcats don't retreat. They reposition. At dawn, the temperature is 15 degrees below freezing. Visibility, 50 yards. Perfect. Captain Robert M. Evans leads his platoon through a forest track, engines throttled down to avoid giving away their position. He stops his M18 just short of a clearing, pulls his goggles up, and studies the terrain. A narrow road cuts across a valley below, the only route for German tanks heading toward Bastogne. Evans radios back. "This is Fox 3. Visual contact in 1 minute. Set up crossfire." The other crews acknowledge. They're spread out in a triangle 300 yards apart, camouflaged under frost and pine boughs. Then the sound, diesel and steel. A column of Panthers and Panzer IVs crawls into view, snow caking their tracks. At the head, a Tiger II, the King Tiger, its 88mm gun cutting through the mist like a spear. The Germans have no idea they're walking into an ambush. Evans watches through his scope. The lead tank is 600 yards away, broadside exposed. He whispers to his gunner, "Wait, wait, fire." The 76mm shell streaks across the valley and punches straight into the Tiger's side armor. The explosion echoes off the trees. The King Tiger jerks to a halt, smoke pouring from its engine deck. The German column freezes. Before they can react, 2 more Hellcats open fire from the flank. Panthers catch fire one after another, shells slamming into their sides like hammer blows. Within 30 seconds, the Germans are blind. Their formation collapses in confusion. Evans yells, "Reload! Move!" His driver slams the gear forward, the M18 sliding downhill through the snow at 40 mph. The Germans return fire. Too late. Shells tear through the forest, hitting nothing. By the time they adjust, the Hellcats are already behind them. Evans' platoon emerges from another tree line 800 yards away, firing again. The Tiger's turret tries to rotate, too slow. Another shell slams home. The beast stops moving. In less than 2 minutes, 3 German tanks are burning. Radio chatter explodes. "Fox 1 to Fox 3, reposition south, Panthers breaking off." "Copy that. Stay mobile." To the German crews, it feels like fighting ghosts. They can hear engines, see muzzle flashes, but nothing stays in one place long enough to target. For the next 4 hours, the Hellcats play the battlefield like a chessboard, firing, moving, flanking, vanishing. When the snow clears by noon, the valley below is littered with blackened wrecks. 13 German tanks lie destroyed or abandoned. The Americans have lost 1 Hellcat, hit by artillery while reversing. One crewman writes in his journal that night, "The Panzers came like giants. We made them dance like clowns." That was not arrogance. It was astonishment. The Hellcats' tactics had turned one of the worst defensive positions in Europe into an asymmetric nightmare for the enemy. German radio intercepts captured later described the engagement as infuriating, unnatural, and disorienting. One officer wrote, "They are everywhere and nowhere. We cannot hit them. They are devils on engines." By the second week of the Ardennes offensive, the 705th had destroyed 24 tanks for only 5 losses. The key wasn't bravery, it was geometry. The M18's combination of speed and communication allowed platoons to control the rhythm of battle. They fought in loops, shoot, move, reappear, repeat. The enemy's power meant nothing if it couldn't anchor the fight. Even the terrain couldn't slow them. In deep snow, the Hellcats' wide tracks distributed weight evenly. It skimmed over surfaces where Tigers sank. German tanks bogged down and became stationary targets. And the irony? The Hellcat's open turret, considered a death trap, became an advantage. Crews had full visibility in low-visibility weather. They could spot muzzle flashes through snow glare before the Germans even saw movement. Speed, vision, and coordination. That trinity turned the Ardennes into a proving ground for a new kind of warfare. The U.S. tank destroyer doctrine, mocked in 1943, was now winning battles through physics and discipline. When the fog finally cleared, German prisoners were asked what they thought they'd faced. One replied, "Small tanks that run like cars, faster than bullets." The Americans just called them Hellcats. And for the rest of the war, that name would echo through German radio traffic like a curse. Because if you saw one, and it disappeared, you knew it was already moving to your flank. And by the time you turned your gun, you were already dead. Spring 1945, northern Italy. The war in Europe is nearing its end, but no one told the men of the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion. They're pushing through the Apennines, climbing steep, twisting roads the German tanks considered impassable. But the Hellcat doesn't care about rules. It was built to move, even where tanks shouldn't. The campaign in Italy was supposed to be slow, cautious, infantry first. But the M18s of the 805th changed that. They moved like predators in the fog, light, agile, loud enough to scare but fast enough to survive. Their job? Intercept German armor retreating toward the Po Valley. The terrain was a nightmare. Switchbacks, crumbling cliffs, and narrow passes barely wide enough for a jeep. A Panther couldn't turn here without scraping rock. But a Hellcat could glide through like a sports car. Captain Charles B. Chuck Hall led his platoon that day. His orders were simple: cut off a German armored column near Bologna. By dawn, Hall's 4 Hellcats were crawling up a goat path that wasn't even on the map. The engines whined, treads scraping stone. The crews joked that they weren't tank destroyers anymore. They were mountain goats with cannons. Halfway up the ridge, the radio crackled. Recon reports 4 German tanks heading north. 2 Mark IVs, 1 Panther, 1 half-track escort. Hall's driver grinned. Perfect. We'll meet them coming down. At 9:30 a.m., the Americans reached a high pass overlooking a narrow valley. Below, the German column wound its way uphill, unaware they were being watched. Hall signaled his crews to hold fire until the Panther came into the open. The enemy tanks were boxed in. Sheer cliffs on both sides, no room to maneuver. The Panther appeared. Its turret turned slightly, scanning the ridge. Hall's gunner whispered, "Range 800. Fire." The first shot hit dead center on the side plate. The Panther's engine compartment erupted in flame. The German column panicked. The half-track veered into the rocks. 1 Panzer IV tried to reverse. Too slow. A second Hellcat fired, hitting it squarely. 2 minutes later, the valley was chaos. Smoke, shrapnel, echoes bouncing off the stone walls. Hall ordered his men to move. "Reposition uphill to keep them guessing." The Hellcats reversed out of sight, engines roaring, then reappeared 400 yards higher. When the surviving German tank fired back, it hit nothing but stone. Within 5 minutes, the 805th had destroyed 3 enemy vehicles and vanished into the mountain mist. It wasn't a duel. It was an execution carried out by speed and mathematics. Afterward, local Italian partisans emerged from the woods cheering. They'd never seen tanks move like that, weaving through switchbacks, firing on the run, disappearing behind ridgelines. One of them shouted, "Americani di vento," the Americans of the wind. That phrase stuck. The Hellcat crews wrote it on their turrets in chalk, "of the wind." In the following week, the 805th repeated the trick across the Po Valley. They struck German supply convoys, gun emplacements, even retreating flak wagons, then sped away before counterfire could land. Their average engagement lasted under 3 minutes. Their kill-to-loss ratio, 6 to 1. But the real miracle wasn't the kills. It was where they did it. No tank destroyer in history had operated so effectively in mountain terrain. The M18's torsion bar suspension, wide tracks, and power-to-weight ratio made it the only tracked vehicle capable of fighting uphill at full speed. A Tiger II couldn't even reach those roads. The Panthers that tried often threw their treads on tight curves. The German engineers simply hadn't designed for this kind of mobility. The war in Italy ended not in a dramatic tank duel, but in a race. The Germans couldn't retreat fast enough, and the Hellcats were faster than every enemy vehicle in Europe. By April 1945, the 805th had cut off multiple escape routes across the Po River. Their M18s, often operating with infantry mounted on the back decks, became mobile assault guns, blasting roadblocks and strong points with pinpoint fire. One final engagement near Verona summed it up. A Panther tried to cross a bridge under fog cover. A Hellcat platoon caught it halfway. The lead M18 fired once, hit the bridge railing, and sent the 45-ton Panther plunging into the river below. The crew of that Hellcat painted a name on their barrel that day: Panther Dropper. They didn't need heavy armor. They had something far more lethal: momentum. When the campaign ended, General Truscott inspected their vehicles. Most were battered, dented, and riddled with shrapnel. Not one had been knocked out by a tank shell. Asked how they survived, Captain Hall said, "Sir, they couldn't hit what they couldn't catch." That one sentence summed up the entire M18 philosophy, and the shift in modern warfare that Germany never understood. The Hellcat had proven that speed could conquer even terrain, that lightness, when disciplined, was deadlier than thickness, and that the American way of war, decentralized, mobile, improvised, had finally surpassed the old European ideal of armored perfection. When the 805th rolled into Milan that May, their Hellcats were decorated with flowers by civilians. Kids ran beside them, laughing, shouting, "Macchine veloci, macchine di libertà." Fast machines, machines of freedom. To the men who'd driven them, that sounded about right. Because in the last months of World War II, freedom really did move at 55 miles an hour. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Tiger, the Panther, and the mythology of invincible armor were all lying in the mud. What replaced them wasn't just a faster tank. It was a faster idea. The M18 Hellcat proved that in modern war, time is deadlier than tonnage. The numbers said it all. Over the course of the European campaign, M18 units destroyed more than 526 German tanks and armored vehicles while losing fewer than 250 of their own. That's a kill ratio of over 2.1, achieved by a vehicle that by every conventional measure shouldn't have survived. It was a triumph not of strength, but of systems thinking. Where Germany built machines of obsession, single masterpieces of steel, the U.S. built networks of motion, radios, fuel convoys, logistics lines, training schools, tactics that made every Hellcat a mobile node in an industrial swarm. The difference wasn't technology, it was tempo. The Tiger's engineers worshipped perfection. The Hellcat's designers worshipped efficiency. The Tiger was handmade, 300,000 man-hours per vehicle. The Hellcat, 10,000. Germany built 1,350 Tigers. America built 2,507 Hellcats in half the time. That wasn't coincidence. That was doctrine. In German factories, craftsmanship was a matter of pride. In American factories, speed was a matter of survival. The Hellcat was the physical manifestation of that belief. That a good enough machine in time is better than a perfect one too late. It was fast, yes, but it was also reliable. Its Continental radial engine could run 500 miles without overhaul. Crews could replace a transmission in under an hour. Tigers, by contrast, required 3 days of maintenance for every week in combat. That's why the Tiger became a legend, and the Hellcat became a war winner. The Tiger's power lived in fear. The Hellcat's power lived in motion, and motion always wins. The lesson was brutal, mathematical, and permanent. In a world where speed doubles and range triples, armor thickness becomes an illusion. Every second that a tank spends still is another second closer to its death. That's why German crews learned to dread the fog. Not because of ambush, but because of what followed it. Silence, a flash, and a streak vanishing at impossible speed. The Tiger represented control. The Hellcat represented chaos. And chaos, when measured and mastered, always devours control. Even German officers admitted it. After the war, Colonel Hans von Luck wrote in his memoir, "We no longer faced tanks, we faced movement itself." That was the moment armor died as an idea. After 1945, no military built heavy tanks in the old sense. The future belonged to medium and main battle tanks, mobile, multi-role, fast. The DNA of the Hellcat lived on in the M26 Pershing, the M46 Patton, and eventually the M60, all faster, all more adaptable, all designed to move rather than endure. Even the Soviet T-54 and later T-72 were products of the same realization. The age of stationary armor was over, because the M18 had rewritten the math. Speed wasn't the absence of defense. It was defense. It was the armor of time. The Hellcat didn't need to survive every battle. It just needed to stay ahead of one shot. And in doing so, it taught the modern world the most important law of mechanized war. That momentum is invincibility multiplied by intent. Crews who drove it never forgot. One gunner from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion said decades later, "We were scared all the time, but fear was fuel. You don't think that you move. If you stopped, you died. So you learned not to stop." He paused, then added, "That little machine taught us how to think faster than death." That's the essence of the Hellcat story. Not glory, not victory, but velocity as survival. Germany built the most feared tanks in history. The US built the one that history feared to underestimate. And when the smoke cleared over Europe, the Tiger's roar was gone. What remained was the echo of engines receding at 55 miles an hour. Proof that speed kills, even without armor. By the time the last M18 Hellcats rolled back into depots in 1945, the age of armored warfare had already shifted. The war had proven what the factories already knew. Speed, communication, and adaptability now outweighed brute strength. The world's future belonged to whatever could move faster, react quicker, and strike first. In the mud of France, in the snow of the Ardennes, and in the mountains of Italy, the Hellcat had done something extraordinary. It turned fear, that primal tanker's instinct to hide behind steel, into motion. It replaced armor with nerve. It showed that victory in modern war wasn't about standing your ground, but about owning the tempo. The M18 was never glamorous. It had no mythic silhouette, no tiger roar, no heavy tracks shaking the ground. But it didn't need them. Its victories were measured not in monuments, but in minutes, the seconds it saved, the time it stole from the enemy, the margin between life and death. When the war ended, those lessons didn't stay in Europe. They crossed oceans. They shaped doctrine, design, and destiny. By the 1950s, the U.S. Army's new tanks, the M26 Pershing, the M46, the M47, and later the M60, all shared the Hellcat's soul. Better engines, faster response, lighter armor. Even air power followed the same law. The P-80 Shooting Star, the F-86 Sabre. Faster, lighter, deadlier through velocity. The Hellcat was more than a machine. It was the moment the Allies learned that technology alone doesn't win wars. Systems do. It proved that the future of battle would not belong to those who could take the most hits, but to those who could move faster than history itself. The Tigers, the Panthers, the King Tigers, all became museum pieces of perfection. The Hellcat became a blueprint. Every modern fighting vehicle, from Abrams tanks to drone swarms, still carries its logic. Don't wait. Don't trade blows. Move, strike, vanish, repeat. That was the Hellcat's gospel. Speed is armor. Coordination is power. It wasn't the prettiest machine of the war, but it might have been the smartest. Because while the German tankers built fortresses, the Americans built time machines. And time, not armor, was the real weapon that ended the Panzer Age.